major Supreme Court decision upholding the right of federal employees to become whistleblowers. The case centered on a Transportation Security Administration federal air marshal named Robert MacLean. In July 2003, MacLean revealed to a reporter from MSNBC that the Department of Homeland Security had decided to stop assigning air marshals to certain long-distance flights in order to save money, despite warnings of a potential plot to hijack U.S. airplanes. MSNBC's report on the story sparked outcry, and the policy was quickly reversed. MacLean was fired 3 years later after admitting to being the source of the article. He sued, beginning a multi-year legal battle.
Earlier this week, the Supreme Court, in a 7-2 decision, ruled on Robert MacLean's behalf. At issue was whether MacLean's actions could be protected by the U.S. Whistleblower Protection Act, a law that protects employees if a disclosure exposes unlawful conduct, gross mismanagement, or threats to public safety. Robert MacLean joins us now from Orange, California. We're also joined by attorney Neil Katyal, who argued MacLean's case before the Supreme Court. Neil Katyal is the former acting Solicitor General of the United States. Well, let's first go to Robert MacLean, but go back to 2003. Tell us why you decided to do what you did. You were an air marshal.
Well, initially, I thought it was a mistake because 2 days before, we had been given an unprecedented emergency briefing that we were going to be attacked by al-Qaeda hijackers smuggling weapons onto aircraft and targeting overseas flights. So, and we never had such a briefing. So when 2 days later, we get this text message to immediately cancel all of our hotel reservations, it made no sense. So
that meant that you would no longer be flying overseas, air marshals.
Pretty much the way it would have affected any flight that was about 3.5 hours long.
So what'd you do?
First, I called my office to find out what's with this text message we all got, and everybody got it across the country. And the supervisor told me that the agency had no more money and they were going to cancel these missions indefinitely. Subsequent investigations by the Inspector General and the U.S. Government Accountability Office concluded that it was going to last until the fiscal year. So it would have been 2 months until more funding came to the agency.
Now, what did you do subsequent to that to go through the normal procedures that you would have to appeal a decision like this?
I called a hotline for the Inspector General's office, and they asked me where I was located. So they directed me to a office in San Diego, California, where they told me that they were simply an audit office and that they did not handle the type of disclosure that I was giving them. So they gave me a number for the Oakland office, where I spoke to a criminal investigator who had been, according to what he told me, he was detailed from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, and I explained to him what was happening, and he actually sympathized, but he said there's really nothing that can be done. These things happen. Agencies run out of money, so this is there's nothing that he could do, and gave me sort of a lecture. Don't press this. You got a long career ahead of you. You might. We discussed our ages, and he said just to walk away.
But you didn't. Tell us what you did.
After that, I looked up. There were 2 journalists that were doing really good and very responsible. And I flew myself, so I didn't want to put myself in danger and the public that I was serving in danger. So I was careful to find these 2 journalists. One was unavailable, and the other I got through. He explained to me that he was in touch with with senior members in Congress who ended up being Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, Barbara Boxer, and Hal Rogers. And he said he was in touch with them, and he also verified that air marshals from all across the country got the same message, and the story broke out a few hours later.
What was the reaction within the agency once the story broke?
Immediately, the agency denied it. They said that's not what we're doing, and eventually, at the end of the day, they issued a press statement that they had made a mistake.
You would later be fired for when it was revealed that you were the source of this information?
That's correct.
On what grounds?
I was charged with one charge of unauthorized sensitive security information.
This is after senators held news conference, an investigation was done, the policy was almost immediately reversed.
Yes, the plan was to go in effect 5 days later, so it never went into effect.
But you were fired 3 years later when they found out who did this.
That's correct.
Let me start with who it's important to. I mean, it's obviously important to Robert and his family. Whistleblowing is a really hard thing to do, and Robert, for a decade, has been living with the consequences of it. And, you know, the Chief Justice's opinion for the Supreme Court, a 7-2 sweeping decision in Robert's favor, finally gives him a measure of relief from what has been a really unfortunate ordeal. So that's just on the personal level. But on the kind of long-term systemic level, this is a really important decision. I mean, Congress enacted the Whistleblower Act in 1978 for precisely this kind of thing, because they knew that government agencies engage in, you know, wasteful spending, or sometimes far, far worse, get mistakes that damage our national security. And it's up to people who are employees like Robert to do the right thing and come forward and to say, hey, you can't do this. This is wrong. And what the administration and the TSA argued in this case was, no, we can write our own regulations to punish people like Robert, despite what Congress said. And what the U.S. Supreme Court said in an opinion that transcended all kind of political lines or anything like that, 7 justices signing on to it, they said, no, you know, the whole point of the Whistleblower Act is to prevent agencies from doing this kind of stuff, these shenanigans like they did to Robert. And, you know, look, I don't mean to malign the TSA here in general. There's a lot of very responsible people there, as there are in all agencies. But I think Congress in 1978, when they wrote the rules, understood, yeah, there are a lot of responsible people, but sometimes there are some who aren't. And that's why we need the act. And so, you know, this is the U.S. Supreme Court in a pretty dramatic fashion coming forward to say, hey, agencies, you're wrong on this stuff. It's really Congress that set the ground rules here, and they protect people like Robert.
Neil Katyal, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit ruled in Robert MacLean's favor. But the Obama administration appealed to the Supreme Court, arguing the Federal Circuit had made a serious legal mistake that would embolden further disclosures by federal employees and could put lives at stake. Can you respond?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected the Obama administration's argument here. And I should say, I don't hold any blame for the Obama administration in bringing the case to the Supreme Court. It was an obviously important case to bring. Don Verrilli, the Solicitor General, I think, you know, made an understandable decision to bring the case to the Supreme Court. It's one that, you know, I disagree with personally, but, you know, reasonable people can have different views of that. But at the end of the day, it's the U.S. Supreme Court and its decision 2 days ago that controls this, not what the Obama administration said when asking the court to hear the case. And what the U.S. Supreme Court said is, hey, you know, agencies cannot be trusted with this measure of responsibility to allow them to kind of do an end run around the Whistleblower Act. You know, the majority opinion, the Chief Justice's opinion said basically that's kind of like the fox guarding the hen house, and it can't possibly be. And it's an interesting thing because in this day and age, I think so many people out there in the country think, oh, it's the Roberts Supreme Court, it's political in one way or another, all these decisions are 5-4. This is a really good illustration of how this Supreme Court doesn't always act politically one way or another, that they come together in a bipartisan fashion. And it's a good reminder. I mean, last year, the Chief Justice did something, and his colleagues did something really kind of surprising. They agreed in roughly 2/3 of the cases unanimously. You'd have to go back to the year 1940 to find that level of agreement. And Roberts' case wasn't totally unanimous. It was 7-2, but it was still, 7 justices ruling against the government in a national security case. That's a pretty rare thing to happen.